Final Fantasy XIV could one day be a single-player RPG experience like any of the other Final Fantasy titles in the series. Is that going to be a good thing or a bad thing for Final Fantasy XIV Online? Let's talk about it. We can see a day now in the not-so-distant future where you can go and buy Final Fantasy XIV, make a brand new character, play through the MSQ, and not talk to other players right up until the end of the most recent expansion. You could spend 100 hours in cutscenes and single play, trust dungeons and solo content, and then you might close the game and go, oh, I've completed the story.
Completed it, mate. You can't complete it.
Like you would any other Final Fantasy game. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? I really want to dig into in this video. So why the video? Now, it might seem a bit of an exaggeration, but in the recent live letter they spoke about how people might be missing out on Final Fantasy XI and XIV's story due to them being MMORPGs, and their new schedule and plan of reworking the early game was to combat that by slowly rolling out trust content, trust dungeons from very early in the game right up to where they are now. Some other additional changes like making Cape Westwind a solo experience and reducing the sizes of some of the early raids. And I think there's a lot to talk about here, because when I go back to old MMORPGs, I'm talking like as an old man, boomer talk, when we used dial-up internet and a phone call would disconnect you from your game, when it took 30 seconds to load a picture of a woman, if you know what I mean. MMOs back then were a social phenomenon. If you could load more than 10 people into an area and involve some sort of chat scenario there, your MMORPG is going to be popular. People will be impressed because you've broken new ground. But as gaming has become more mainstream, it's moving in the opposite direction. People are playing MMORPGs on consoles, mobile gaming is bigger than ever, and more people are busy and demanding casual content. And that's one of the reasons Final Fantasy XIV is doing so well. More and more people want casual content outside of intense hard raids and intense multiplayer activity that requires a heavy time commitment. And being able to hop on for an hour, being able to pause and walk away because the kids are crying or you need to cook your dinner, playing for an hour because that's all you've got and not being left behind is really wanted a lot right now, and a lot of games are moving in that direction. There's still great parts of Final Fantasy XIV that are super competitive. I've been doing Savage Raid in this tier and I'm absolutely loving it, but for every hour I probably spend Savage Raid in, I probably spend 3 just sitting around chatting to people in my house or in Limsa. So as someone who absolutely loves the social side and the hard side of MMORPGs, and as someone who has grown up with that immersive social experience, the idea of moving content to single player always seems a little strange to me and is always something that I get a little nervous about. But given how Final Fantasy XIV have done it so far, I am optimistic about what they can do with the trusts. So for those that haven't unlocked trust yet, or just haven't done one, or if you're new to the game or you're not even playing and you're just curious for this video, trusts are basically the ability to run a piece of multiplayer content like a dungeon or a raid, but instead of going in with real players, you go in with NPCs, like members of the Scions, like the group you work with in the game. So it completely replaces the social element needed to do content, and you have to do these raids and trials to progress the story. I personally don't use them often at all. I used a couple in Endwalker for personal reasons because I really like the people that were chosen for these trusts, but I do think they're a great addition to the game. If you want to run a dungeon at 4 AM and no one's queuing for the dungeons and you're going in as a DPS, which is the least popular, run it with a trust. It's instant. If your internet's unstable or you're worried that you're going to have to step away halfway through and you don't want to let people down, you can run it with a trust and you're not really letting anybody down. Nervous of playing with other people or just not confident as a healer and you want to try healing, playing with a trust is a great way to learn. I think trust is it's such a good adaptive thing they've put in that just opens the game up to more people, and I totally can't blame anyone for wanting to do stuff with trust because I've done it and I think it is pretty cool. It's just not my way to play. Overall, if people are new to MMORPGs or just want their solo play for some reason, or just the fun and the lore of running it with their favorite characters as NPCs, I think trusts are great and they take nothing away from the game because they're completely optional. However, the one problem I have with what's coming that worries me, it's not a problem, but more that worries me, is if all dungeons can be run with trusts and they moved all other content that's required for the MSQ, like Crystal Tower, this is tinfoil hat territory, Crystal Tower and other raids into trusts as well, Final Fantasy XIV might lose that multiplayer feel and experience. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments. Like, do you think the entire MSQ being soloable is a great move, making the game more accessible to non-MMO players, or does it ruin the feeling of a MMORPG and take the spark out of the game? Let me know in the comments what you think before I carry on. I'm just one guy with my own experiences and I'm going to give my opinion, but I'd love to know what you think first because I'm really, really curious what the what the players think, what people think about these changes. So just my opinion on, is single player in MMORPG good or bad? I think single player to multiplayer is more of like a spectrum of single player game to multiplayer game. I don't think any MMORPG is really one or the other, because there's always some sort of social element, whether it's like a hub type situation like Destiny, or you can go and sit in a bar with friends in a fantasy game. One of my favorite MMORPGs of all time, that's one of the most memorable for me, is Star Wars The Old Republic, because it had such a detailed and incredible story with old school BioWare level choices all throughout the game. You can play as a character and take Sith choices and turn evil, and you feel like your character by the end of the game because you've had so much development. But with that game, I didn't feel the multiplayer side was very good, so I didn't engage with any of it. I played through the story and left, and that was it. But I also loved WoW for many years, which I played majority as a multiplayer game, social game. I never really engaged with the story because, in my opinion, it wasn't very good. Therefore, I think a game can succeed in either way. I think that keeping the game solely single player for the MSQ is a really good idea. If there is a subsection of the game that want to play the game solo for whatever reason, and really want to play through the story but aren't interested in multiplayer, I think it's great. Let them. I put off Final Fantasy XIV Online for so long because I didn't think they could incorporate the game as an MMO, and I put it off for 7-8 years. But I do think with this great push towards trusts and solo content and bringing in these single player games, I think once they've got them in, they should still try, Square Enix should still try and encourage the multiplayer interactions where possible. Almost all of my interactions have been great. People have been super patient, friendly and supportive. When I was a new player, I met some incredible people in this game, and people have helped me from day one, and I still talk to them now. But I do understand that a tiny fraction of bad interactions I've had, I still remember them today. They have stuck with me. So I understand why people don't want it, but I think to ignore the multiplayer side of the game for the fear of the few bad apples is letting yourself miss out on such a huge and incredible part of this game. I have a friend who started playing because they were really into Final Fantasy games, and I preached to them how good the Final Fantasy XIV game was, and I said, I know you're like 9 and 10, you're going to love this, it's going to be amazing. And they were hesitant at the multiplayer, and they quit after the first dungeon. They didn't know how multiplayer games worked, they didn't understand DPS, aggro, tanks, it was completely new to them. They felt overwhelmed, they felt like they were letting their team down, and they've never played since. So I think the ideal solution would be to warn people before the first dungeon and just say that the recommended and the majority of people play with other players, but you can turn it off and play with trusts if you really want. But I think they should encourage multiplayer every now and again throughout the game, maybe with the raids, maybe with certain dungeons that are good with other players, just to encourage people to try and put themselves out of their comfort zone a little bit, because I've gained so much confidence and experience from playing with other people, and I wouldn't want people to miss out on that. That's the one reason that I think making it single player is problematic. The second thing that I'm worried about is if someone did play through the whole story single player, and then when they got to endgame, they hit the final part of the story, and they wanted to keep playing. The next step is, other than just leveling and doing old content, is going into something like extreme raids. And the thought of a brand new player who's never ran a dungeon walking into an extreme raid or something in the party finder is just terrifying. But hey, that's just my view. That's how I feel. Overall, I think turning the MSQ into a single player experience or pushing more of the MSQ to be soloable is ultimately an amazing thing with very few downsides. I hope it doesn't put people off trying the multiplayer side of instance content, because be that raiding or just chilling with your FC or just doing social things in game, because when all you know is the story, it might be all you care about. But community in Final Fantasy XIV is incredible. It is, in my opinion, one of the best parts in the game. And when there's a lack of content or when we're between patches, it is the thing making me log in every day to chat to my friends, to hang with my friends, to do stuff with my FC events, things like that. And I would really hope people don't miss out on that, because it's just so good. But that's it really. Just wanted to draw attention to this. It's one of the main things I really enjoyed in the live letter, and I've been thinking about it quite a lot, trying to put it into a video, but here we are. If you enjoyed this video, consider dropping a like or subscribing to the channel. We also have a Discord community of Final Fantasy players if you want to come hang out. Take care. I'll catch you in the next one.